Book 1, Chapter 1, Year 2030. The first opening, the world did not end with a warning. There were no countdowns, no prophecies trending online, no final speeches. One moment, the planet moved to the familiar rhythm of satellites, stock markets, traffic, and wars fought at a distance. The next, the sky tore open. 10 portals appeared across the globe, immovable, colossal wounds in reality itself. From 9 of them came death in forms humanity had never faced, creatures that did not fear bullets, armies that did not break under artillery, beasts that shrugged off fire and steel as if they were rain. Humanity did what it had always done. It fought back with the weapons of its age. Fighter jets screamed overhead, missiles struck true, tanks rolled forward, and naval guns thundered. For brief moments, there was hope. Some creatures fell. Cities cheered as explosions swallowed invading forces, but it did not last. The enemies adapted with terrifying speed. Or worse, had never needed to adapt at all. Bullets slowed them, but did not stop them. Explosives wounded, but rarely killed. Entire armored divisions vanished beneath waves of bodies that did not rout, did not retreat, and did not seem to care how many died to reach the walls. The horror spread faster than any war in history. Goblin legions poured through streets like floods, overrunning neighborhoods in hours. Armored orcs smashed through police lines and military checkpoints with brute force that mocked human strength. Beasts, some towering, some impossibly fast, hunted civilians through subways, hospitals, and evacuation corridors. Communication networks collapsed under panic and overload. Governments issued orders that could not be carried out. Borders became meaningless as refugees fled in every direction, chased by things that did not tire. Billions were caught in the open world, on highways, in rural towns, in the cities never designed to be fortresses, and were simply erased. Then came the most unsettling moment of all. While 9 portals vomited war, one remained silent. No armies emerged, no monsters charged. Instead, figures stepped through calmly, tall, silver-haired beings with composed expressions and ancient eyes. Elves. They did not come as conquerors. They came as witnesses. They spoke of a forgotten alliance, of treaties signed tens of thousands of years ago, of wars humanity had survived once before, only to lose the memory of them. And they spoke of gems, objects of power that could do what modern weapons could not. By the time the world understood that truth, entire continents were already burning. The age of missiles and machines had failed in a matter of days. Humanity was no longer fighting to win. It was fighting to endure long enough to learn how to survive. 2030 to 2034. The 4-year war. The first months after the portals opened were not a war in any traditional sense, they were a collapse. Humanity fought blindly, clinging to doctrines, weapons, and command structures built for conflicts against itself. None of it mattered. Entire militaries were bled dry in weeks. Ammunition stockpiles vanished. Fuel routes were severed. Satellites fell silent as ground stations were destroyed or abandoned. The world's most powerful nations learned, almost overnight, that power meant nothing against enemies who did not fear death and could not be meaningfully stopped by conventional force. It was during this chaos that the truth about the gems emerged. The Elven delegation revealed what no human government had yet understood. Only humans could wield them, not elves, not dwarves, not the countless other races pouring through the portals. Humans alone could bond with gems and magical books, artifacts capable of reshaping reality, of turning fragile bodies into weapons that could stand against the invaders. The discovery did not come with instruction manuals or safety measures. It came with desperation. Those who survived the bonding became something new, something terrifying and necessary. They were called heroes. The early heroes were not legends, they were survivors. Firefighters who burned without burning. Soldiers who lifted armored vehicles like toys. civilians who awakened powers they barely understood and unleashed them in panic and rage. Many died within days of awakening, consumed by abilities they could not control or torn apart by enemies drawn to their power. But some endured. And those few changed the course of the war. Where armies failed, heroes held lines alone. Where cities were lost, heroes bought time, minutes, hours, sometimes days, for evacuations that saved millions who would otherwise have been slaughtered. As the war dragged on, the world itself began to unravel. Governments collapsed under the strain. Nations fragmented into isolated regions, then into nothing at all. Supply chains disintegrated. Famine and disease followed the monsters, killing nearly as many as the invasions themselves. By the third year, humanity was no longer measuring losses in cities or countries, but in percentages. Entire populations vanished. By the time the fighting reached its peak, nearly 90% of Earth's population was dead, killed by monsters, starvation, exposure, or the simple inability to escape a world no longer built for the living. The turning point came when heroes stopped fighting defensively. Instead of holding the line, they began stepping through the portals themselves. These missions were almost always one way. Strike teams entered alien worlds knowing extraction was unlikely, their goal simple and brutal: destroy whatever anchored the portals from the other side. Entire teams vanished without trace. Others succeeded at the cost of their own lives, collapsing portals in blinding surges of energy that could be seen from orbit. By 2034, after 4 years of unbroken death, the impossible finally happened. One by one, the 9 hostile portals destabilized and collapsed. The invasion ended not with victory celebrations, but with silence. Cities reduced to ruins, continents reshaped by loss, and a species permanently scarred. Humanity had survived, but it had not won. The old world was gone. In its place stood something harsher, smaller, and forever aware that survival had come at a price measured not in victory, but in extinction narrowly avoided. 2034. The last open portal. When the final echoes of the war faded and the 9 hostile portals collapsed, humanity faced a choice that would shape every century to come. One portal remained active, not by failure, but by design. Beyond it lay an immense, ancient city, unlike anything on Earth, a neutral city-state that had existed for millennia as a crossroads between worlds. Its towering stone architecture bore the marks of countless civilizations layered atop one another, each age leaving behind halls, bridges, and districts shaped by different races and cultures. This city did not belong to conquerors. It belonged to treaties. The portal itself was not owned by Earth. It was governed. Control rested with the city's ruling council, a carefully balanced assembly made up of representatives from many races: elves, dwarves, humans, and others far older or rarer. No single species held dominance, and no army was permitted to cross the threshold uninvited. Any race seeking peaceful contact with humanity could petition the council for access, trade rights, or diplomatic recognition. Goods, knowledge, and envoys flowed through under strict oversight, while weapons, armies, and unregulated magic were barred. By mutual agreement, Earth and the Council shared authority over the gateway, transforming what had once been a source of annihilation into the only sanctioned bridge between worlds, and the fragile foundation of a new, interdimensional order. 2034 to 2080. The Age of Survival. The decades following the war were not an age of rebuilding. They were an age of endurance. The idea of the nation-state died quietly, without ceremony or resistance. There were no populations left large enough to sustain borders that spanned continents, no governments with the reach to enforce them. Survivors gathered where they could be protected, and protection became the only currency that mattered. Cities that endured did so by turning inward, severing old ties and redefining themselves as independent city-states, responsible for nothing beyond the walls they could defend. Those walls rose higher with each passing year. Stone, steel, and composite materials were fused into fortifications hundreds of feet tall around major population centers, with smaller settlements protected by scaled-down versions of the same designs. Roads between cities were abandoned or fell into disrepair, claimed by monsters, bandits, and forgotten war remnants. Instead, high-speed rail lines ran through sealed, armored tubes, connecting city-states like lifelines stretched across a hostile world. Outside the walls, the land belonged to danger. Inside, survival was structured, regulated, and enforced. As humanity stabilized, the world grew stranger. Non-human races, some long known through the Gateway City, others newly revealed, began settling on Earth. Some came as traders or refugees, others as laborers, engineers, or mercenaries. Old fears lingered, but necessity outweighed prejudice. Orcs and goblins worked beside humans in foundries and construction yards. Tauren hauled freight through reinforced corridors. Reptilian races, revealed openly in 2037 after centuries of concealment, emerged from the shadows and claimed a place in the new order. Earth was no longer a human world. It was a shared one, bound together by survival rather than trust. Heroes remained essential, but their role changed. In the immediate aftermath of the war, heroism had been an act of desperation, raw power thrown against extinction. By the middle decades of the Age of Survival, it became a duty. Heroes patrolled the wastelands between city-states, hunted remaining strongholds, escorted caravans through dead zones, and responded to breaches before they became catastrophes. They were no longer miracles. They were infrastructure. Feared, respected, and regulated, heroes became the living barrier between civilization and the chaos that still pressed against its walls. By 2080, humanity had not reclaimed the world, but it had learned how to live in what remained. The planet was quieter, harsher, and smaller, its future no longer measured in expansion or progress, but in endurance. Survival was no longer a moment-to-moment struggle. It was a way of life. 2080. The second opening. Exactly 50 years after the sky first tore open, the portals returned. They appeared in the same locations as before, igniting panic the moment the alarm sounded. Some of those sites had been fortified for decades, encased in steel, layered defenses, and constant surveillance. Others lay beyond the reach of rebuilt civilization, buried in ruins or surrounded by dead zones where no permanent settlements had been possible. In those unguarded regions, the invasion was swift and merciless. Entire zones were overrun in days, their loss accepted almost immediately as containment lines were drawn closer to surviving city-states. This time, however, humanity did not freeze. Heroes were no longer lone survivors acting on instinct. They deployed as organized strike teams, each member trained for a specific role: frontline tanks to hold the breach, damage specialists to tear through enemy formations, and support heroes to keep them alive in environments that killed unprotected humans in seconds. Instead of endless defensive battles, the strategy was decisive and brutal. Teams pushed through the portals themselves, destroying command centers, anchors, and spawning grounds on the far side before the invasions could fully stabilize. The fighting was still costly, but it was controlled. Losses were measured in hundreds rather than billions. Within weeks, the portals destabilized and collapsed once more, leaving behind scorched landscapes and a world shaken by a realization far more terrifying than the invasion itself. The portals had returned not as a fluke, but as a pattern. Humanity had survived the second opening, but it now understood the truth. The war between worlds was cyclical, and preparation, not hope, would determine whether the next opening would be endured or become the final one.